A few weeks ago, one of you commented on our last video and said, if someone keeps falling into the same sin, how do they rebuild self-control? Please make a video about habitual sin. And while Will and I did not talk about this comment or even acknowledge it to each other at first, over the past couple weeks, we both found ourselves writing about watershed moments in things that we had struggled with for a long time and thought processes that we realized had been damaging us in a myriad of ways. And you didn't know I was writing about it, and I didn't know you were writing about it, and then we both published it on the same day and used very similar sort of analogies to actually get the point across. Mine being more so in relation to things like anxiety and fear, and yours being in relation to pride. But the common themes that emerged out of both of them was moments where you look at your circumstances and you are almost immediately and shockingly made aware of the effect that you've been having on those circumstances, and in such a way that you did not realize how deeply something was affecting you and affecting your surroundings. And then the sense of helplessness that can tend to follow that when you're looking around at a state of affairs and having really no idea how you got there and no idea how you did not recognize the habits or the thought processes that got you there. And I want to start with a quote from Blaise Pascal who says, "We're so unwise that we wonder about in times that do not belong to us and do not think of the only one that does, so vain that we dream of times that are not and blindly flee from the one that is. The fact is that the present usually hurts." When you talk about habitual sin, but also when you talk about sin in general, the distinction of habitual sin obviously refers to struggling with the propensity to do the same thing over and over and over and over again, even though you've already acknowledged that it's sin and that you shouldn't be doing it. But it's also worth acknowledging that sin, period, is habitual by definition. And it is a pattern by definition, because we as humans tend to operate according to patterns, and we understand the world through patterns, and everything we know is somehow mapped onto a pattern. Which means whether you are doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, and whether it's the smallest, most practical, most obvious decision that you know is hurting you, or even if you have managed to avoid recreating the same material circumstances over and over and over again, but you find yourself disappointed or unsatisfied with what you see in the mirror at certain points. And you can't necessarily tie it to this or that action, or you can't tie it to this habit or that decision. But there is still an undercurrent of helplessness or despair in the face of mistakes and the consequences of those mistakes. There is at least the consolation of, because I am a creature made for patterns, I have the ability to observe those patterns and observe my patterns and take stock of what's going on inside of me and what's going on around me. And that is not a project that is new to humanity or new to people of faith or Christians or whatever. One notably that we will talk about a lot probably in this conversation is Soren Kierkegaard, who we've talked about a lot in these conversations, was one of the first people to tie sin to what he calls the concept of anxiety, or more sort of pertinently, angst, which is just the Danish word for anxiety. He wrote a whole book about it, and he was someone who was very well experienced with anxiety, and he wrote a book called The Concept of Anxiety. And his general thesis was that sin as a concept in terms of missing the mark or acting, making decisions, existing in such a way where I find myself hurting those around me, hurting myself, and failing to exist the way I was made to exist. Regardless of what you think about original sin or guilt or whatever that dynamic is, it is the case that every human finds themselves under the conditions that sin emerges from, which he would say is anxiety. And he's not talking about nervousness, or he's not talking about a pit in your gut necessarily, even though that is obviously like a signal of it. He's talking about existential anxiety, or what he would call the dizziness of freedom. And he says, anxiety is freedom's actuality as the possibility of possibility. This is freedom's profound secret, that at the same time it is anxiety. Anxiety can be compared with dizziness. He whose eyes happen to look down at the yawning abyss becomes dizzy. It's very easy in self-reflection or in confession to reduce patterns of sin to, well, I get in the moment, I'm not paying attention the way I need to, and I just make a mistake. And many times, sensationally, experientially, that is exactly what happens. But if that's all that's going on, you're in a pickle, because then you have no understanding and no control and no way to address the fact that sometimes you just aren't paying attention. You just aren't on top of your desires or on top of your inclinations. And so to understand where those desires emerge from and where the pressure to make a decision that I already know cognitively is not what's best for me, where that emerges from. A very practical understanding of sin, you can think about it as missing the mark, you can think about it as existing in a way that I was not made to exist, whether that's through action or thought or words or whatever. You can also think about it as failing to believe that God's will for my life is my greatest happiness. And in the same way that someone like Kierkegaard would define faith as giving up the one thing you cannot obtain for yourself and believing that it is secured for you in Christ, you could also define sin as attempting to obtain for myself something that is secured for me in Christ, attempting to secure, according to my own means, what I'm supposed to be trusting God for. And in a broad sense, that is usually something like contentment, happiness, purpose, meaning, and it expresses itself in a million different trickle downs, whether it's sexual sin, greed, pride, anger, anything. All of those are ultimately the result of attempting to gain something good via a method that is not conducive to producing good things. The reason that inclination is so strong is because if there's one thing I cannot get away from when I'm looking at my circumstances, it's the fact that, one, I have found myself in a state of affairs that existed before I necessarily realized that it was there. There are numerous aspects of it that had nothing to do with me, that I had no say in. And now that I'm looking at it, I do have a say in it. And I do have to act, and I do have to do something. And when I do, it will have consequences, and the situation around me and inside of me will change for better or for worse. And that's part of what Kierkegaard means when he says freedom's actuality as the possibility of possibility. As soon as I become aware of possibility, as soon as I become aware that the world around me is not a fixed state of affairs in which I have no say, I now have the responsibility to do something with it or not do something with it, which deciding to not do something with it is still a decision in itself. That is dizzying. Even the indecisiveness as a category is the category of dizziness, of looking at the abyss and waiting for something to emerge out of it, but knowing that whatever it does is going to partially be because of me. Obviously, that puts a lot of pressure on the individual. And when the most obvious options that emerge out of possibility are not necessarily conducive to my having the life of Christ lived through me, it's going to be incredibly easy for me to sin, especially when that's what I'm used to. So when I find myself in conditions where I'm looking at something, I'm looking out into that realm of possibility, and I'm at least conceptually aware of all the things I could do, and I find myself overwhelmed by the responsibility of that. But there is one decision that I've already made before, or that's easier, or that everyone around me is making. That's probably going to be the one that I tend towards. So operating with a category of habitual sin, first of all, of sin as habitual. Sin, it's very easy to treat mistakes or struggles in a vacuum as if it is a unique thing that has emerged in my subjective experience. And it can only be addressed via a specific pathological dissection of that particular thing. There's a great deal of value in being able to unpack all the particular details of your experience with this or that struggle, but sin, period, exists in the context of you as a human participating in the same structure of consciousness as every other human, the same structure of consciousness that Jesus participated in. When Hebrews says that he was tempted in every way so that he would be able to sympathize with us, it is establishing the commonality that the same conditions of like what we would call the human condition that leads me to sin is consistent, one, across all people, but also across my life in every stage. You mentioned, and jump in here whenever, but you mentioned right before we started recording, the feeling of looking back at a time in your life or a pattern that you previously found yourself in and not even recognizing the person. And I have felt a similar sensation even just over the past few weeks, over the past month. I feel like I've aged 5 years in the past month. And I found myself staring back in the face of things that I thought I was done with when I was 17, or that I thought I was done with when I was 14. And I'm finding myself anxious about things that were giving me panic attacks when I was 15 that I stopped thinking about when I was 18. But for whatever reason, I'm 21 years old and they're back. And comparatively to plenty of people that I'm around on a regular basis, that's a 6-year span of development that is a drop in the bucket for people who are twice my age. And they're having the same experience stretched out over 20 years or 30 years. And that's debilitating. And it's defeating. And it lends itself to a sense of despair and a sense of hopelessness. And that is the cost of being an effective, it's the cost of the range of my effective will extending to my circumstances. The fact that I'm not just thrown into the facticity of my surroundings, but that I actually was never going to emerge in any other conditions other than the ones that I'm in. There is no alternative timeline. I can spend all the time that I want dreaming up possible states of affairs. But until I confront the only one that is real, I'm wasting time. And in especially more recent philosophy, and when you read existentialists and you read the Camus and the Sartres and the Foucaults of the world, and it originated with someone like Martin Heidegger, this idea of thrownness, being thrown into my circumstances without my consent, and I'm just this random emergent phenomenon of consciousness amidst all these details that I had nothing to do with, and I now just have to grin and bear it or take it on the chin. That is certainly one way of characterizing the emergence of my own self-awareness and my awareness of my place in the world. It is possibly the case that I am just here and there's no necessary reason that I am here, and whatever I decide to do with it is ultimately arbitrary. And that would be the general existentialist project in the way that it's traditionally understood. Or it is also a not illegitimate way of characterizing it that because there are no other actual circumstances other than the ones I have found myself in, it is not the case that I am thrown into a state of affairs from which I am fundamentally alien and have no actual consequence in. It could be the case that the reason I have found myself in these conditions, in this body, with these desires, with this family, with these friends, with this struggle, or with this disability, or whatever, the reason I have found myself there is because I am the result of all the chain of causality that led to all of that. Like the same chain of cause and effect that led to my circumstances also led to me, which means, in a way, and this may not sound consolatory at first, but for all the wretchedness of my conditions, I emerged alongside those conditions. So, I am no more alien to my facticity than I am to my own consciousness. Because if my consciousness and my subjective experience has emerged specifically and only really at this time, in this place, under these conditions, then there is at least a bare minimum baseline in which I belong to this place and to this time and to these conditions. So when I look at the pressure that is presented to me and the possibility that is presented to me, I do not necessarily have to confront it as this emergent phenomenon that ostracizes me from the only reality that I know. I can also receive it as the natural result of who I was made to be and where I was made to be and when I was made to be. And this is sort of, I don't even have this in my notes, but Kierkegaard, in what he calls his edifying discourses, he has a passage where he's talking about the verse in James, I think it's in James, I could be wrong, where he says, every gift is a gift from above, given by the Father of light, in whom there is no temptation and no shadow of turning. And he takes this, one, obviously to mean every good thing you receive ultimately gets traced back to God. And everything you receive can be received as a good thing that gets traced back to God. And there's one passage in it where he says, when your allotted amount was more than you expected, did you thank God? When it was less than you expected, did you thank God? When you were denied your wish, did you thank God? When you yourself had to deny yourself your wish, did you thank God? When you were not denied your wish, did you thank God? And he goes down the list over and over and over and presents both sides of the coin as these are the conditions which you have been given. You can either sit around and consider whether the glass is half full or half empty, or you can acknowledge the glass is empty and now you must do something about it. And that analogy is not even mine. There's he was a priest and a professor in Germany named Romano Guardini, who wrote a book called Power and Responsibility, and another one called The End of the Modern Age, where he talks about this experience of being so, especially so one of the functions of modernity being the increase in the information and an increase in the degree to which me belonging to a time and a place doesn't just mean a community now. I'm also aware of all the things going on in the world around me. So me belonging to my time means belonging to the time that I've found myself in here spatially, and belonging to the time that I've found myself in informationally, because I am aware of things that are going on outside of my own sort of spatial realm. That is inherently overwhelming, and it only seeks to sort of exhaust the already high pressure conditions of potentiality and possibility. And a great deal of that reflection and that emotional energy gets tied up in debating whether or not you're cooked. And the same happens in conversations around sin. Like, even, this is an experience that I think is probably more so common for young men and increasingly so for young women. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about in our last conversation, but like questions about, or conversations around addiction to pornography. And or any sort of sexual sin, where the conversation for years of people's formative sort of developmental years, most of the conversation centers around what's okay and what's not, and how cooked are you, and are you as cooked as the next guy? Rather than, regardless of the degree to which you're cooked, you're cooked. So the question should then become not, how do I unpack and sort of sparse out how cooked I am relative to my surroundings, or relative to what I'm comfortable with, or relative to what I can hide? The conversation then becomes, if I am at all failing to belong to the world that I have found myself in, and do so in a way that further cultivates it into the world that it was meant to be, and cultivates me into the person that I was meant to be, if there's anything in me that is not moving in that direction, what do I do with it? How do I address it? How do I think about it? How do I speak about it? And in that same work that I referenced earlier, Blaise Pascal says, "Know then, proud man, what a paradox you are to yourself. Learn that man infinitely transcends man. Hear from your master your true condition, which is unknown to you. Listen to God. Is it not clear that man's condition is dual? We perceive an image of the truth and possess nothing but falsehood, being equally incapable of absolute ignorance and certain knowledge. So obvious is it that we once enjoyed a degree of perfection from which we have unhappily fallen. Let us conceive that man infinitely transcends man, that without the aid of faith he would remain inconceivable to himself, for who cannot see that unless we realize the duality of human nature, we remain invincibly ignorant of the truth about ourselves. Man is nothing but a subject full of error that cannot be eradicated except through grace." And then later on he says, "Pride counterbalances all these miseries. Man either hides them or displays them and glories in his awareness of them." When you talk about the pragmatic side of habitual sin, one, I think it is easy to read someone like Pascal and sort of hear that as like a very dogmatic, very like, okay, this guy's obviously a Christian, this guy obviously is operating with the presupposition of like something like original sin, and something like the fact that apart from God, or just sort of left to our own devices, humans don't tend to make the best decisions for themselves and for others. But he possesses a virtue of clarity because he is willing to acknowledge the glass is empty. The section that all of those quotes fall under in sort of the collection of his sort of fragments is just titled Wretchedness, because it's a piece by piece meditation on a condition that he sort of, through reflection, seems to find pretty obvious, which is, I perceive an image of the truth, but I possess nothing but falsehood. He has another concept in that same section where he says, man should never be allowed to consider himself equal to angels or equal to animals, but he should be aware of both. As in, if I sell myself, if I operate with that pride that either seeks to conceal my misery or brandish it, but also sort of console myself with self-awareness and go, oh, but no, I'm working on it. Like I've got it figured out. Like at least I'm self-aware. And I want to elevate myself to the level of an angel. I will end up incoherently speaking, thinking, and acting according to my own desires and my own sort of condition. If I do myself the disservice of lowering myself to the level of an animal and just sort of throwing my hands in the air and saying that I give up, and treating, which is I think what you see a lot in more modern treatments of despair or human vice. And I think you see this in the treatment of like sexual instincts or any desire as something that's just, the heart wants what it wants, or like those are just, everyone has these desires because you're an animal, like you're human, like it's just your nervous system and da-da-da-da-da. Obviously, all of those biological, circumstantial, natural factors play a role. But the moment I can see that there is nothing to me other than sort of factical causes, I'm also conceding a loss, and I'm going to behave incoherently. Because if that was the case, I would not be aware of the fact that I'm uncomfortable with those desires, or that I'm uncomfortable with those things. There's never in the history of biological life been a predator who stops to consider how he feels about killing. There has never been a reproductive instinct in any animal ever that has been halted by, is this other animal consenting to my reproductive instinct here? So I am best suited, and I am starting off on the best foot if I can acknowledge comfortably the fact that my condition is dual. I do have the capacity to perceive what I ought to do and what I ought to want. And I also possess a susceptibility to anxiety and pressure that sometimes makes it easier for me to choose the alternative to what I know I ought to do and what I know I ought to want. And I think those three nomenclatures, like those just concepts of angst as the moment, actually I would say thrownness first. Thrownness as in the moment that I become aware of my facticity and I become aware of my identity as a effective agent in my environment, time, place, people, etc. That then moves me into the feeling of angst, which is I am now aware that I have the ability to make decisions, and I in fact actually have a prerogative and a duty to make decisions. My options are, I can remain in the state of thrownness where my fear and my anxiety ostracize me from my surroundings and cause me to continue only ever acting out of that sense of scarcity, to where every decision I make is somehow an insecure grasp at trying to get my feet on the ground where I'm at. Or, even though it doesn't sound like a positive move, I can make the move, I can forego this sense of thrownness and choose wretchedness, which is a sort of, in a backwards way, the more consolatory of those states of being in saying, there are a great deal of things out of my control. I have found myself on the receiving end of a great deal of injustice or inconvenience or abuse or whatever. But it's also a mixed bag of things I can control and things that I can't. Things about me that are noble and things that are not. So if I am going to do anything, it should at least account for both of those. If I'm going to address a mistake that I've made, if I'm going to tell someone that I'm sorry and genuinely seek forgiveness, if I'm going to tell God that I'm sorry and genuinely seek forgiveness, if I'm going to tell myself that I'm not going to do that again, if I'm going to tell myself I'm not going to be that person, I want to be better. I don't want to look up in however many months or however many years and still be here. That has to start with a realistic diagnosis of my circumstances. And it's only after that that I can even begin to unpack the practicality of, why do I want this? Why is this the thing that I'm anxiously and myopically grasping at? Why is this the thing that every time the degree to which I belong in this world, in this body, with these people is called into question? Why is this the thing I go to? Why is it porn that I look to tell me I belong? Why is it this relationship? Why is it this substance? Why is it anger? Why does it make me angry that I feel like I don't belong and not afraid? Why is pride the thing that consoles me? Why is my ego the thing that has to be pumped up when this is all suddenly called into question. And that's not, I have no idea how long I've been talking. Hasn't been brief at all. And when you map any of this onto a life, it only gets longer. For however long I've been talking, it's a drop in the bucket of how long I felt like I was losing my mind for the past month. And you've been around for glimpses of it. That's a drop in the bucket compared to all of the life that was lived, eons and eons of 21 years, that even resulted in me thinking about any of this, or even being in the conditions that led me to despair or led me to feel helpless. And that will probably be the case for the rest of my life. And that's the point. This is the only time that there is. And to waste any time wishing for another one is a whole new version of guilt that I otherwise was not privy to, that I otherwise could have avoided. And I think of the Dostoevsky quote where he says, man is a mystery that has to be unraveled, and you should not say you have wasted time if you commit yourself to this unraveling. And he says, I want to study this because I want to be a human being. There is no limit to the list of things I could say that I regret. There is no limit to the list of conditions that I would say I wish were different. But the glass is empty. And I'm very, very thirsty. So my options are limited. Mm-hmm. And that puts me in a very particular position in relationship to the kind of person that I want to be.
Yeah. I don't know. I was I was writing a lot before this, and it connects to the habitual, like you said, we had talked about a little bit before we started. The habitual life that you live right now, once you start a new habit, you begin to forget that you were even in that habit to begin with. And I can't remember if this is from Fear and Trembling or Anxiety, but Kierkegaard says, indeed, if in speaking I cannot make myself understood, then I am not speaking, even if I were to speak uninterruptedly night and day. And it's like, I let you talk so long because I don't know if any of these 1,500 words that I wrote can be understood by anybody. And I even wrote that in one of the paragraphs. But I'll start with sin. The definition of sin, this was on the Holy See website. Sin sets itself against God's love for us and turns our hearts away from it. Like the first sin, it is disobedience, a revolt against God through the will to become like God's, lowercase g. Knowing and determining good and evil, sin is thus love of oneself even to the contempt of God. In this proud self-exaltation, sin is diametrically opposed to the obedience of Jesus, which achieves our salvation. I don't know if I talked to you about this, but when I was reading Thomas Merton's Seeds of Contemplation, he talks about this illusory person. And the illusory person is the person that I so desperately want to become, but I can't because God doesn't know who that person is. And there's just been so many things that, like, if I can wrap this year, 9 months with one thing, it's just saying thy will. And this definition of sin, saying loving oneself to the contempt of God, it's like to sin is to love oneself against his will. And I don't know what his will is. That's what all of this writing is. I mean, I had stuff in the Summa that I had read earlier today, but it's kind of like what you were talking about earlier. You may have said it, but it's like we didn't even really want to do this topic because we thought there was more important things to do. And it's like, I thought the more important thing was to be what I've always done the last few videos and put quotes and stats and everything else on my computer and read them out and have that, but I just, there's stuff that's more important to the person than a stat. Like, what about what we're feeling? Like, he's asking us how habitual sin affected us. Like you said earlier, he could have gone to a litany of other resources to ask about habitual sin, and he came to us. He was one of the, 5-10 comments on our thing. It's not like he thought it was going to get lost, you know? So I don't know if any of this is going to make sense. I'm going to read some of this, but I want you to jump in whenever, because I am happy to stop because it's all written down. You know, that's why I write stuff down so I can remember. Okay. This whole thing is more of just me thinking about the person that I was, the person that I am right now, and the person that I want to become. But like I said, with the illusory person, I don't know if this is the person that God wants me to be.
Right.
And that is what is so hard, because I have all of these decisions that I have to make in the upcoming months. And I don't want to be the person who God does not know. I don't want to just choose what I want to do against his will. But I don't know what his will is. Now, it's different with sin, because you can obviously tell the difference between what you're doing for God and what you're being selfish with. But I'm tired of sin, not for my sake, but for the way that I have to look upon others as well. I can't say shit or cuss, because I am the one people look up to. I can't tell you that I feel so alone in a world of infinite possibilities, because you need a reason to stop sinning. Honestly, this is so much harder, so much harder. Deny yourself every day and be the light that everyone looks at. My God, it is so hard. Be the one God chooses and not get a single day to have a problem. If I am alone, how much more are they? I know what God promises and I know what he has given me, but I lack what I think I do not have. My mind has trapped me in a game of comparison, in a life that I do not want to even live. Who can see me except the Father? No one. At times this is a blessing, but what about right now? I have more time than I know what to do with, and I'm pissing it away by writing this idiotic essay. So anyways, who is like me? I am not home. I can't do anything without an eye seeing me. I will either be someone's confirmation or their demise, the weight of despair. Now, this is about to get into social media and being this, we talked in another episode about an avatar.
Yeah.
And it's so difficult, because I get so frustrated with what I have become with social media and what I see myself as. But then, like, we were walking over here and I'm just thinking, like, I only have this opportunity to talk to you and film right here because of that. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do with what I have, because I can look back at what I was doing and I can look back at it was all I had. But now how am I supposed to link these two things together, where I'm trying to get away from an old habit while also using the good that came from that and become a new person? I just want to go to a church and see Christ crucified. I want to see what it looks like to say, thy will be done, and get on with my day. But what do I do with my day? Anxiety arises from possibility, as Kierkegaard states. It's true. I didn't even know you were going to say that. But I give myself to people because my life has no meaning if I cannot help you see. My world is in ruin if you fail. I failed. I cried for an hour the other night because my attempts at another salvation hasn't taken root. I do not care if I die, but if you do, then I do as well. My life means nothing to me, and I hope that one day the evil spirits don't use it to make me think that I shall take control of what it means to end what has no meaning. I am not suicidal, by the way, but I would die for you to see how much I care. I wake up every day to myself. I must fill my time or Satan will close the gaps. They ask, how do you know so much? What makes your mind so hungry for knowledge? I have nothing else. I cannot boast about what God has granted me. I live in an extrovert's hell. I sit alone and read words in my brain and think thoughts while explaining them to nobody. I have a cloud of people online I talk to, but you are invisible. God has allowed me to help people tremendously. But what about the here and now? The ones in the flesh? Why the hell are they going to hell, while the ones who mean relationally zero to me get paradise? Hell, it is hell for me. They fortunately have escaped, but it has set me up to be a machine. Everyone knows who I am through a screen, and I have portrayed a Christian avatar. Can I tell you my sin, or does that make me invalid? Do I need to stumble to make myself human, cut myself for you to see my blood? I don't think this makes any sense to anyone but me. I sat in my dorm with nothing but a phone and a dream. I wasted something. I can't talk to anyone about it because I am the bird in the cage and you are flying free. How could you understand? I can't give up social media because it's who I am. How are you supposed to give up who you are? But my God, I have asked, pleading on the floor to release what I used to love. Take it, take it, take it away. Erase me from my memory. I want flesh, not a screen. I think, I don't know, because I know exactly what this comment was talking about with sin. And like going back to what we were talking about earlier, like I can see places that I was at or places where I was and things that I was doing in those places, and I can look at those spots and even forget things that took place in those places because it's just not who I am anymore.
Right.
It's so far removed that I don't even link the two together anymore. And when we say there's no concrete list of things that you do to get out of sin, there's not. I can't tell you what worked for me with pornography that's going to work for you. I can't explain to you how what I did in my life is also going to take root in your life, because it is just not that simple. Is this real enough? Do I need to show you more of my sin? Do I need to tell you how much of a douche I am? That's also why I became Catholic. I can't do the image. I want a place where I can go and cry in the sanctuary and not have someone tell me that God has a plan. Thank you, I know, but let me sit in my despair because I have just nailed Jesus to the cross again. Give me guilt, give me transparency. I am not in for slogan Christianity where the churches are named after chapter and verse or some other hot commodity. I want Christ crucified because it saved me. And I read a Substack post the other day from this guy when he was talking about just Christian art in general, and we've talked about that. And it just gets so redundant to even the movies where you have this plot line where the person's down in the dumps, they give their life to Christ, and then it's just smooth sailing afterwards. The movie ends, and it's no longer, I'm in despair or I have a sin problem or any of that. It's I'm now in Christ and I go to church and I wear a smile on my face and I found a girlfriend, she's becoming my wife, and my family's also. And that's just not true. Christian art is despair. I'm horrible. Like even the Shia LaBeouf interview, he's like, "What are you talking about? Like I'm a horrible person. Like I am a horrible person. I don't want to pretend like I have everything together." Or because that's how people comment that, and they feel so alone because they no longer feel like they have any part in Christianity because their view of this Christianity is sunshine and rainbows after they find Jesus, and that's just not true.
Yeah, first of all, when you reading what you just wrote a second ago and saying like, I don't even want to, I'm indifferent about even writing this because what's the point? Like no one's gonna get it. And that was the primary motivation when I mentioned earlier, we both ended up writing about basically the same topic from different perspectives and then publishing it at the same time and not realizing it. My version of that was, and I know some of our listeners will have read it, so this will sound familiar, but I said, I am profoundly uninterested, borderline repulsed at the propensity to curate and clean up the stuff of life. Cigarettes stink and burn, roses have thorns. Every angel is terrifying in part because their capacity for beauty is matched in step by their capacity for destruction. Something worth believing is something worth saying, and something worth saying is worth being disfigured for. If you speak, you may say what you mean, and you will say what you did not mean and what you did not know you were saying, and you ought to say it anyway. I don't want to avoid calamity if the cost is foregoing the sublime. I want to make something meticulously, and if it goes up in flames, I want to breathe in the smoke, and I want it to burn, and I want to smell like the smoke of everything that I did. I don't want to save face and lose my soul. I was telling someone in a conversation 2 nights ago that I was realizing things that I would look at recently that I would say were pretty significant missteps on my part were the direct result of failing to believe that a comfort that has eluded me my entire life was not secured for me in Christ. And a large part of it was, I would say the main part, and I even think it's pertinent you mentioned something like the question of like, oh, like, why do you know so much? Like, how do you do that? How do you talk about that? How do you learn that? Or how do you find that information? The feeling that I have more often than not failed to believe is secured for me in Christ is the feeling that someone understands why I feel the way I feel about something, or why I think about something. And anyone who knows me well, or anyone who has probably even just listened to any of these conversations, knows that I'm long-winded. And there's a degree in which that is rooted in a perpetual fear that I'm not giving enough information to be understood. And I desperately want to be understood. And I'm deathly afraid of a preventable misunderstanding leading someone else astray. And it took a great deal of circumstances outside of my control and things that I literally just did not get a say in and did not have a choice whether or not they happened, or whether or not they went wrong, or whether or not they got messy. It took a great deal of those things to go wrong in order for me to relinquish, at least in the moment, and it's something that has to be consistently repeated, in order for me to relinquish my claim on being understood or doing something defensible. Doing the thing where I can confidently say, everyone who sees me do this will know why I did it. That is an unbelievably impossible standard. And you even, before you started, you said, and you kind of said it in passing, almost like undercutting something you had said before. And you said, you can obviously tell the difference between what's selfish and what you do for God. But I am increasingly suspicious that that becomes less and less true the more you want to do for God. I would say for at least the past 3 years of my life, if not longer, most of the most severe mistakes that I have made have been things I thought I was doing for God. And whether it is the most practical, nagging, thorn in your side habit that you can't shake, or whether it is a existential conviction that you think defines who you are as a person. Motive. One of my favorite verses in Scripture that my dad used to say to me all the time is in Proverbs, and it says, "The heart of a man is like deep waters. Who can know them? But a man of wisdom draws them out." And one of the things he would always tell me was, the man of wisdom is the Holy Spirit. The man of wisdom, it's Christ. The man of wisdom is the rescuer that brings you into an understanding of what those waters contain. And I've found that to be true more and more so in the sense that the vast majority, if not the entirety, of the way that we were meant to encounter the man of wisdom is through his presence in the world. And his presence in the world is living and active through his people. And it is by bumping into the wills and desires and preferences of the people around me and the images of God around me that the contents of those deep waters are going to be drawn out. And sometimes they're going to be gross. Sometimes they're going to be absolutely disgusting. And that's part of the unraveling process. That's part of the man is a mystery that has to be unpacked. You are a mystery. No, proud man, what a paradox you are to yourself. And whether it is the moment after to try and give as cohesive of a vision for this as possible for any kind of sin. Everyone knows the moment after you've done something you know you should not have done. Maybe not everyone, but a lot of people know the feeling of looking at a chunk of your life or a pattern or a thought process and going, what went wrong? What did I miss? And something that helped me with those moments of practical small mistakes and that I've seen help people around me a lot is, one, my understanding of myself, my internal dialogue, the way I move through my surroundings and my decisions and all these things is ultimately a matter of language. I can't not think in some language, whether it's pictures or words, and some people say that their experience of that or the medium of language that takes up their sort of self-conscious it varies. Regardless, there is media there. You can't not think. So, my capacity to pay attention to motivations and pay attention to the internal conditions and external conditions that led to me behaving a certain way or thinking a certain way is in part determined by the language available to me. We talked about this when we talked about the pornographic mechanism. I'm pretty sure I brought up the phrase hypernormalization from a British documentarian named Adam Curtis, or his documentary is titled that. It's actually from a Soviet journalist who talked about the way that totalitarian regimes and technocratic regimes are able to limit the context available to a group of people until they actually don't have the language to express what is going wrong. And in the exact context of the USSR, it was the regime was failing, but no one knew how to say that. The average day-to-day person living in Soviet Russia had no way to express that the regime was failing them. The same is true in a less organized, less systematic sense for most young people despairing of the lack of meaning in their life. They don't actually have the language to say, I feel this lack of meaning and I want to rage against it. I even sitting in philosophy lectures, and I will have plenty of classmates and very, very smart people who disagree with me on this. But one of the things you'll notice, first of all, a great deal of the shared social experience that young people today have surrounding purpose, meaning, etc., most of it is the outflow of French existentialism. Albert Camus, Michel Foucault, Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, that school of thought, they had a greater influence on the way the modern or postmodern Western individual conceives of themselves than almost anything else, I would argue, save maybe like capitalism. Every single one of those bodies of work and all of the outcroppings of them. Michel Foucault is the most cited man in academic history. All of their worldview and all of the ideas that have flown out of that all get traced back to one single presupposition from Friedrich Nietzsche, and it's that God is dead. You can get lost. There are people who spend their entire lives parsing out one section of one essay from one of those thinkers. And you can drown in the amount of information and the amount of thought and the amount of expression and art that there is that carries forward these ideas and this method of handling the human condition, to the extent that the suggestion that God is dead and we have killed him has been hyper-normalized to the point that the gap that is there oftentimes cannot even be expressed by the people who are the victims of the failures of those thought structures. And there is plenty of debate around what someone like Nietzsche was saying, thought he was saying, blah, 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 blah. I'm of the opinion, and I think there's a great deal of evidence to support this, Friedrich Nietzsche was confronting a similar disfaction with modern, mainly Protestant Christianity, even though he had a lot of negative things to say about Catholicism. Post-Enlightenment Christianity, I'll say. He was confronting the same problems that Soren Kierkegaard was, but they came to vastly different conclusions. Soren Kierkegaard ends up at a leap of faith where I do something because I must do something, and I will do the thing that I believe God has put in front of me to do, and I will do it believing that the thing I desire most is secured for me in Christ. Friedrich Nietzsche ended up, however you want to interpret this, at God is dead and we have killed him, and it's our responsibility to build something up in its place. And he ended up nonverbal, manic, dying on his sister's couch because he couldn't take care of himself. And for however many ways you want to explain the circumstances of a mental break, I think one thing I've been consistent on in all these conversations is I am fundamentally unconvinced of the degree to which you can separate material, existential, biological, spiritual, economic conditions from one another. And all of that to say, the language that is available to me is going to have a massive impact on my ability to process my desires and my situation. One thing that you hear a lot with a lot of people when they're discussing habitual sin is the moment where your brain feels like it goes on autopilot. And I've sat across from dozens of, specifically in my experience, young men dealing with sexual sin, looking at the results of their actions and saying, it didn't cross my mind all day. I didn't think about it for weeks. I never thought about her in that way. I even said that morning I didn't want to do that. I spent multiple times that day consciously thinking, I'm not going to do this. And for whatever reason, in the moment, it's like I had no say. It's like I had just completely forgotten about all of that. And it is oftentimes the case we experience desires with such a degree of passion that we do not have the language to sort of understand the fact that we are even feeling the desire. Language, media, period, is a middle ground. It places something between me and the urge, you might say. So, if the most prominent passion in me at the moment is, I don't want to do that, and I clearly have language for, I don't want to do that, my experience of, I don't want to do that, is going to sound like, I don't want to do that. And it's going to be clear and distinct to me that I do not want to do that. Then a moment arises under whatever particular conditions cause it, where the most prominent passion is no longer, I don't want to do that. It's, I want to do that. The issue is, most of those things that run the risk of overwhelming me with the misguided desire to do them are things that I am incentivized not to pay attention to. Things that I am encouraged by my pride and by the fear of exposure to not talk about and to not assign language to. So I find myself in a position where I've gone from a passion, a productive passion mediated by my ability to speak clearly about it and to say it out loud, being switched out for an unproductive passion, unmediated to the extent that I do not actually have any time or middle ground in which to process the subjective experience of wanting to do it. And the moment that follows is when now the unproductive passion of wanting to do it is replaced by the passion of shame, of knowing that I should not have. And everyone has language for shame. There is not a human being on the planet, save someone with severe personality disorder, who lacks language for guilt and shame. So I find myself in a situation where my options are continue ignoring or continue avoiding calling something what it is and saying it out loud and being honest about it. And even in the moment that I don't feel it, being honest with myself about what I am feeling. I can avoid that at all costs. And I can continue finding myself behaving in such a way where my better judgment is not even a factor. Because the thing about me that allows me to consider alternatives is not in play. Or I can choose not to lie to myself. I can choose to go through the discomfort of calling something what it is, assigning language to that desire, assigning language to that insecurity. And then, progressively, as I am able to be honest out away from the desire to do it, when the desire to do it emerges, I will not be confronted by a blind, nameless, faceless passion. I will be confronted by the language I have assigned to it and the medium that I've provided for myself via reflection, via repentance, via confession. That will be the ground in which I confront the desire. And Fyodor Dostoevsky has a quote where he says, "Above all, don't lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his lie comes to a point that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him and loses all respect for himself and for others, and having no respect, he ceases to love." I have experienced a great deal of anxiety for most of my young adult life around distinguishing truth and my ability to present the truth to someone clearly, my ability to discern the truth from someone clearly. And time after time, even obsessing over that, I found myself in positions where I failed to communicate that truth clearly and I thought it was the end of the world. Or I failed to discern the truth clearly, and I thought it was the end of the world. And the reason was not that I wasn't obsessing hard enough. The reason was that in all my attempts to discern the truth clearly, I was lying to myself by saying that it was reasonable for me to expect myself to discern and communicate the truth perfectly. The desire and obsession with being understood, with being defensible, with being justified, I was attempting to obtain for myself something I never could, failing to believe that it was secured for me in Christ. I was lying to myself. I was losing respect for myself and respect for others because I was believing my own lie. And I found myself incapable of loving people because all they became was an object for me to project my anxiety about the ambiguity of information onto. And to kind of bring all of that under one tent, I think the reason I appreciate the candidness of a word like wretchedness that Pascal uses is because it's gross and harsh enough to immediately imply the reality of the situation. But in naming it, the content of the name is disconcerting. The notion that I have named the disconcerting thing is consolatory, because it's the idea that in my physicality, in my facticity, and Pascal talks a lot about this, Kant talks about this, and when he talks about our relationship to the sublime and what it means to experience the sublime. But one of the things Pascal says is, spatially, I am at a perpetual disadvantage because the universe is big and I am not. Intellectually, existentially, consciously, I am at an advantage because I have apprehended that the universe is big and the universe has not apprehended me back. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 15, this is probably my current favorite passage of scripture, and I've returned to it many times over the past probably 5 years. The context of this is God has told Saul to go to the Amalekites and completely do away with the range of their effective will and to make sure that their culture does not propagate or perpetuate itself in any way. And some of the caveats he gives to make sure that Saul just goes in and does the job and doesn't get any funny ideas is he tells him not to take the king as a hostage and not to take any of the livestock from the people. So, as one obviously does, Saul goes in, he takes the king hostage, and he brings back a bunch of the livestock that they stole from the people. Samuel, the prophet at the time, finds out that Saul has done this, and he comes back, and he's very confused, and he says, although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission saying, go and completely destroy those wicked people. Wage war against them until you have wiped them out. Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord? And Saul comes back and says, but I did obey the Lord. He said, I went on a mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites, and I brought back Agag, their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. So Saul has made a couple of interesting rhetorical moves here in the sense that he says, well, actually, no, I did obey God. God told me to go wipe out the Amalekites, and that's what I did. He fails to mention the fact that he did it his way, not the way he was told to do it. Then he says, I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag, their king. In the sense that he is taking credit for doing the thing he supposes was the point, and doing so in a way so exacting that now he has this king as his trophy. And then he says, the soldiers took the sheep and cattle for the plunder. But even then, the best of it was devoted to God, and they are going to offer it up as a sacrifice to the Lord your God. So in just a few sentences, he has avoided the implication that he was in any way disobedient. He shifted blame onto someone else. And he's distanced himself from the structure of responsibility. It was going to be devoted to the Lord your God. Not the Lord who made me king over Israel. Not the Lord who wasn't going to give Israel a king, and when they begged and begged and begged, he chose little old me. And Samuel replies, he says, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obedience? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance is like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Do you not know that more than the Lord values sacrifice, he values paying attention? And I know I've quoted that verse to you before.
Yeah, there's another translation where it says thankfulness.
And Saul's response is, then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, I have violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the men, so I gave in to them. And now I beg you, forgive my sin and come back with me so that I may worship the Lord. This is a confession. And actually, it's worth noting, it says, but Samuel said to him, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. And this is actually the sort of watershed moment where David starts the process of coming in to replace Saul. Saul says what he means to sound like a confession of guilt. And he says, I was afraid of the men, so I gave in to them. The material expression of the authority that God had trusted Saul with was more apparent to him. It was more obvious to him. It was more readily available sensationally. The pressure that he had to make a decision. And there were thousands of men dependent on that decision. And those men want to be paid. And those men want spoils for their labor. Those men want glory. And he became anxious. And he had an either or. He could either believe God or not believe God. And he made the wrong choice because he allowed the circumstances of his facticity to determine the decision that he made rather than believing in the authority of the one he was responsible to. When I hear you talk about your relationship to a social media following, and we talked about this a little bit in like the very first conversation we ever recorded, and we've talked about it at length outside of those, but one of the things that you and I have bonded over a lot is a lot of the feelings that you express in navigating your circumstances with your platform. I have encountered similar feelings navigating not as much a platform as much as like a persona. And I even told one of our friends the other day in sort of processing some of the stuff that's happened over the past month or so, up until recently, I can't remember the last time I encountered a difficulty in my life that I did not immediately interpret as something to be mined for a lesson for someone else. Such that even in things that were the most, in the circumstances of something that for probably the past month and a half has been more important to me than anything else, when that started being threatened, even when I could not name anything I cared about more than that thing, in the back of my head the entire time was this feeling that I had a inalienable responsibility to do it right publicly so that other people would look at me and go, oh, he figured it out. And for whatever benefit for them. Somehow, like telling myself the same lie, like the same way I have a responsibility to perfectly discern and communicate the truth to you. And if I fail to do so in any way, whatever side of the exchange that failure is on, there is blood on my hands, so to speak. It's the same lie. It's the lie that I will somehow encounter a stage in the unraveling of me learning how to be a human being. And it might not just be for me to figure it out. Not to be watched, not to be displayed, not to be repackaged in an object lesson. But it's like so much of the pressure in confronting sin or confronting a mistake comes from concern for what it would look like to even have overcome it. Like, no one wants to be the guy who wants to struggle with pornography. No one wants to be the guy who used to struggle with pornography either. Not in name. No one wants to be the guy who struggles with pathological lying. No one wants to be the guy who used to be a pathological liar. Because they all imply imperfection. They all imply wretchedness. They all imply that somehow there was a degree of perfection available to me that I fell from. And oftentimes the first lie I tell myself is, I am somehow obliged to make it as obscure as possible for anyone to even suggest that I ever did fall from that. That is where that came from, how that takes any meaningful root in any human being's conscience is beyond me, apart from it being another confirmation of that imperfection, that we are so easily deceived into the ignorance of saying, not only must I, but I'm actually capable of appearing as if I'm okay, or appearing as if I have figured this out, or appearing as if I know what I'm doing. No one knows what they're doing. Not ultimately. All of them, I guarantee you, all of the most driven, successful, by whatever your metric is, ambitious people are doing so. Like the thing at the back, at like the baseline of that nobility and that virtue is a massive gap that they have leapt across. And it's for as fascinated as I am by people like Blaise Pascal or Fyodor Dostoevsky or Soren Kierkegaard, where all their work has this undercurrent of a constant, repetitious drudgery through the most disgusting reality of what it means to be human. And then it's really only at the buzzer for all of them. It's really only at the last word that there is an alternative. And the alternative in every circumstance is the leap. It is the failure of rationality. It's the failure of my ability to plan and nail everything down. It's the failure of my ability to figure everything out before I make a decision. And that's the saving grace. It's the fact that it fails and it was always going to. The world in which it doesn't is one of those wishes that I end up wasting time on. The world in which the sin that I'm in now goes away without me getting really messy doesn't exist. And that's even thinking about the tension, an allegory that has really interested me recently is the idea of rolling your own cigarette. And it is a very tedious process, and mandatory to do it successfully is to maintain enough tension in the paper for it to take proper shape. And you risk breaking the paper. But if you're so afraid of breaking the container for the thing, the container won't hold the thing. And then, after you've gone through all the trouble to meticulously craft and maintain this tension, you set it on fire and you watch it burn. And you would never enjoy the spoils. You would never enjoy the benefit of maintaining that tension unless you were willing to set it on fire and watch it burn. And it's kind of like a passing comment that I think is easily missed, but it, in my mind, is kind of like the metric of, like it's kind of like the foundation for the only conclusions that I've come to that have maintained any degree of sanity for me for the past month. Because I also talk about, I have been known to enjoy tobacco products, and I'm well aware of all the potential health detriments that come along with that. And I say, for all the rationalizations, even using like a fun little allegory of rolling your own cigarette to somehow, attribute some philosophical depth to that is a romanticization of something that I know in some degree is hurting me. And I say, for all the real rationalizations I can offer for my nicotine consumption, there is an unavoidable risk of detriment that accompanies the benefits and simple pleasures. However, I have yet to find anything that actually interests me in which this is not the case. Any coping mechanism that offers you a clean fix with no downsides or no discomfort is probably not real. How much, there is no telling for whoever listens to this, how many of the habitual struggles that someone might find themselves in, of just very practical, very obvious day-to-day habits that they wish were not the case, how many of them are rooted in anxiety responses seeking comfort that promises a clean, isolated, vacuous escape until it doesn't, until it fails them. That's the case with pornography. That's the case with addiction of any kind. That's the case with trying to save face and manipulate or lie or clean up your act to the extent that you can sort of get away with something or live with yourself. And there's a very interesting back and forth in that, because it's like, even realizing, talking about the self-awareness thing, realizing the latent anxiety that undergirds all of those feelings. You mentioned a while ago, like, the thing in the back of your head that's like, oh, I can't say shit because look at who I have to be. I think that might be like one of the first times I've ever heard you say a swear word. Anyone who's spent an extended period of time around me knows I am not necessarily adverse to crass language, or not necessarily, I won't say crass, but harsh or direct.
Right.
And to be completely honest, one of the reasons that I've resented people who've tried to like give me a hard time about that is because most people that I've met who are sticklers about strong language is because they are anxious about being perceived as messy or dirty or disorganized or aggressive or whatever. And for all the fear that I have, you not to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it, but what you published over the past week had to do with taking a great deal of pride in something, where you said, I'm doing this for God. And in the back of your mind, there's something saying, and I'm better than you because I'm doing it for God. As silly and reverse as it might sound, the streak in me that is not necessarily interested in fitting into anyone's lines properly looks at the way that I speak, and where someone might go, you're a little bit much, I go, yes, I'm a little bit much, and I'm a little bit much for God. Because I don't want to be so buttoned up, and so that I sacrifice and I alienate myself from the reality of the situation. And in doing that, in being so hyper-conscious of the package that I'm giving someone and the object lesson that I'm portraying for someone, I feed into the lie that I tell myself that says every decision that you make has to be for the consumption of someone else to get something. There has to be, if you do anything or say anything and a light bulb doesn't go off in someone's head, that is one mark against you. And so the constant back and forth of self-contradiction and treating these temptations, treating these desires as if they exist in their own sort of vacuous experience, rather than acknowledging it's the same thing. It's two sides of the same coin. I'm being pulled in different directions, and that's the tension. But I'm so anxious and I'm so avoidant of that tension that I have to take this into the spectrum and this into the spectrum and put them in separate categories in terms of how I think about them, because otherwise I have to acknowledge that I am a paradox unto myself, and I perceive an image of the truth, but I possess nothing but deception and nothing but falsehoods. And the last thing I'll say on this is, you mentioned I was not familiar with the idea from Merton that you bring forward, like the person that God doesn't know. But it reminded me a book that you didn't really like, of The Sickness Unto Death. couldn't really get into
A
it.
few pages in.
Kierkegaard, spoiler alert, the sickness unto death is despair. And, or this like angst that just sort of undergirds the human condition. And the way he defines despair is he says, despair is what happens when I cannot stand to be around I. Mm-hmm. And you could say like, oh, it's what happens when I hate myself. But even a sentence like that is not the most helpful, because it's like, I mean different things when I say I hate myself. Myself is a conception, and there's a structure that I have built out around what is actually meant implicitly when I say I. So rather than addressing the structure of the self, which is more so like a recent psychological concept, there is something innate and something instinctual about what is implied when I say I. And it carries forward that meaning without this implied structure. It's more so the way in which I am immediately present to myself. When I can't stand I, there's a rub, because the one thing I cannot ever get away from is I. Even when I want to build that structure, I am actually still, I'm extracting I from its immediate presence, and I'm putting it over here and building out a structure around it, and I'm applying all of this language and all of these concepts that were previously, like they bring in baggage with them, because I had to get them from somewhere else. They didn't originate in I. And so I will never get away from it. And he uses the example of the young man that says, either I will be Caesar or nothing. And then he fails to be Caesar, and he despairs, because the one thing he is closer to than anyone is the thing he hates more than anyone, which is the I that has failed to be the thing he said he ought to be. Another example, he says, the young woman who says, either I will be my beloved's or I will be nothing. Effectively, she has suffered a fate worse than death, because at least in death I am rid of myself. Mm-hmm. But so long as I am alive and have failed to be the thing I said I ought to be, I'll despair, and that's my only option. And that sickness, there's a double meaning to the phrase, the sickness unto death, because it's like, there is a way in which ultimately that will be the thing that kills me, running from it or chasing an alternative. And death itself, when we talk about the wages of sin being death, the natural result of sin is death. Death is not something imposed on me externally because I have sinned. Death is something that bubbles up in me as a result of my inviting sin in and taking sin on. Death is only a factor when I give in to the sickness that carries me unto death. The authority of death is broken, and thus the propensity to despair, or despair as the only option, is broken when I take on and make use of the life that has been available to me, which is the life of Christ. The life of Christ, which is completely sustained by the Father, completely sustained in the will of the Father, who does know what is best, who I can trust, who does give good gifts, and in whom there is no temptation and no shadow of turning. Mm-hmm. For as long as that life is lived in me, there is no failure in which I cease to be the thing I was made to be. Setting out to do anything with a platform and failing or succeeding in any way, there is no end result that can come down the line in which I fail to be what I was made to be, insofar as I'm living the life that was given to me through Christ. And in Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard gives a description of the night of faith. And one of the ways he describes him is he runs into his buddy on the street, and his buddy says, "Look, I want to build a building on this lot, but I have no idea where to get the materials." And the night of faith just goes, "We'll find them." And then he keeps walking down the street. And he walks down the street all the way home, believing that there will be a roast on the table when he gets home for dinner. And he gets home and it's not there. And he goes, we'll figure it out. And it's not indifference. He's not apathetic towards his responsibility to follow up on his word when he says we'll figure it out. He's not apathetic towards his hunger or his need to eat when he gets home and there's not a roast. He's not apathetic to what disappointment there might be that he thought his wife was going to make him a roast and she chose to do something else. There's not difference. He's not resigned from his conditions here, from his facticity. He is so present to his facticity that he knows the world in which he doesn't know how to get the materials and he has to figure it out is the world he belongs to, because it's the only one there is. The world in which his wife did not make him a roast is the world that he belongs to, because it's the only world there is. So for him to rebel against the world there is by despairing and in so wish for another world that was never going to exist is a waste of time. Mm-hmm. And that, as overly philosophical or overly intellectualized or whatever you want to call it, as that might feel for something as simple as a habit, when you say, like you said earlier, and we kind of said this at the jump, there is no 12-step plan for stopping this or that sin. I know people that have dealt with almost identical addictions, and some have stopped cold turkey, and some have relapsed 20 times before they ever saw any progress. I've seen people who could stare in the face of something they used to struggle with and not flinch. And I've seen people who, if they even catch a whiff of something they used to struggle with, they have to completely remove themselves from the situation. There is very, very, very little that is consistent and replicable in terms of the minutia. If anything, the one thing that is consistent and replicable and is the case whether you like it or not, in any case, struggling with sin, is you have to look it in the face. Mm-hmm. You have to pay attention. The glass is empty. And now you have to do something.
Yeah.
And you have to do something today, and then the next day, and every other day afterwards. Because the fix is not the fix for now. The world you belong to right now requires a decision. And then tomorrow, that desire will arise. And the only world that exists, the world that you belong to, is a world in which you now want to do the thing you said you weren't going to do yesterday. But it's not yesterday anymore. Now you want to do it. So now you have to act again. And that will continue to be the case for the rest of your life. And eventually, one day, the opening to fear and trembling. We talked about this not too long ago, where he says, it seems like now everyone posits faith as this place they start, and they seek to go further to this thing they call certainty. And he says, I guess I'm just kind of behind the curve, because this certainty thing sounds a little bit absurd to me. I don't think I'm capable of it.
Right.
And they treat faith like it's something that's sort of primitive. Even any discussion of like religion or anything, it's like, oh, well, like, yeah, I used to be, but like then I grew up, and it's like it just didn't hit the same. Everyone I know who has seen the most life, who has experienced the most, who have suffered the most, they tend to be the most religious, superstitious, mystic, not super concrete, kind of fast and loose individuals when it comes to how they think about things in terms of black and white, sort of straight edge situations. So, and he says, in those old days, faith was a thing, faith was a task for a whole lifetime. So that the old man, bruised and battered by the anxiety of his youth, but not overcome by it, could look back at that anxiety and say, it is by that anxiety that I had faith. It is in every single one of those moments that I found myself thrown into a world that I could not understand why it had to be the case that I emerged alongside these conditions and found myself here. Every single one of those moments where I was confronted by my own wretchedness, that I'm not an angel or an animal, and that I'm a paradox to myself. The ones where I chose to despair, and the ones where, having chosen to despair previously, I brought myself to make the leap, they all compounded into what I could call the life of faith. That is what it means. That we kind of discussed briefly in the first conversation, this like dissatisfaction with any attempt to like simplify or like put a bow on what it means to be a Christian. Mm-hmm. And you talk about like someone like Shia LaBeouf, very controversial individual, has made a lot of mistakes. He is one of my favorite people on the planet to listen, talk about his faith, whether it's to Bishop Robert Barron or Andrew Callahan from Channel 5 or John Bernthal. But to hear someone who can in the same breath say, I am like the worst person I know. I'm actually, I have failed my wife, I've failed my child, I've failed people who believed in me. I've failed myself. And then when he's asked, if Jesus is in the room, what would you do? And he starts weeping and he says, I wouldn't say shit, I would kiss his feet. That's all I'm interested in. And honestly, the best answer I could give if someone were to ask me, hey, I keep struggling with the same sort of sin pattern and I'm dealing with a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. What do I do? The first step I would say is probably every moment that you are conscious to do so, behave as if Jesus were to walk in the room, the first thing you would do is kiss his feet. If you would have any other response, you may have an unrealistic view of your own capabilities and your own standing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. The whole time I listen to you, I just think like I commented this, like I'm in a habitual part of my life that I'm in the midst of wanting to change. And you even saying the thing about you haven't heard me cuss, or I live in this situation where you said something about, you know, being in this where I have something to gain, or being in a position where you shouldn't want to have just something to gain. But the way that I view social media is like there's nothing else to get except gain.
Yeah.
Anything negative is negative. So it's like I have to do whatever's possible to get gain. I want you to repeat the thing about the wisdom of the heart, the proverb.
Yeah, the heart of a man is like deep waters, the purposes of a man's heart are like deep waters, who can know them, but a man of wisdom draws them out. Yeah,
and I think about, you know, me wanting to get away from my habitual lifestyle of being in social media and moving towards the flesh in these interpersonal connections with people that I feel like I've missed out on. And I think about even our conversation at the park the other day, where it's like there's no amount, or me praying with one of our friends, praying the rosary with him a few months ago. I can't think of an instance in my life on social media that makes more of an impact on me that would be anywhere near the conversation that we had or that rosary.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do about that, because I think there is something so valuable in what I have been doing, but there's more value in the next step. Hiding your sin is pride. Humility is what sets you apart from the devil. St. Moses the Black says, you fast, but Satan does not eat. You labor fervently, but Satan never sleeps. The only dimension which you can outperform Satan is by acquiring humility, for Satan has no humility. And I think about the thing we've been talking about with being messy. Stop trying to hide. Like, I want to see the messy parts of people's lives, and I can't do that on social media because nobody does that on social media. Yeah. Like, I want to see the bullshit. Christ has had his most amazing encounters in these instances. This can't happen on social media. There's no room for truth in a world built upon lies. Social media is a lie. It's a fraction of life. The same way sin doesn't rule our entire lives, goodness doesn't either. The only difference is during your life you can conceal it, but when you can control it, like on social media. Send me to the front lines where you are drunk off your ass. You struggle with pornography? Tell me. Give me something to care about. I want to preach Christ crucified. I want to give you hope. It is hell to sit in a temple and have so much to give, but nowhere to give it. This is a hole social media has put me in. You can't come close to me. I am an aesthetic. I can't be one of you. I have neglected the flesh. I have put my cards into an algorithm and it has dealt me shit. I hunger for flesh relationships, but they seem to be few and far between because I am an image. I am a caricature. I am an avatar. I went to confession last week, so now I am new. From someone who has seen the cloud and the imaginary in social media, I can't tell you how much we need the sacraments. We are a material creature. God loves matter. God gave us matter. We do not just have to look upon for repentance. We can go to a in persona Christi and receive absolution. I can, instead of just imagining what Christ's body is like, go and see it and bow. I can sit in the presence of God's body and weep as I read a letter from my mom saying that she is proud of me. I want matter. I want to matter to people. And I want what I have to make you see that you also matter. I am always astonished by the hidden admiration. I received a note from my brother last week from the Substack post that he was proud of me. There it is. My life can end and I am proud to see it gone. I lived removed from the world of sin. Mine was always hidden. You can hide a porn addiction. You can hide judgment. You can hide irresponsibility. You can hide from the world what it misses. I didn't struggle outwardly. My mouth was proper, my hands were open, and my legs stayed out of rooms where others could see. So I missed exposure. I have always had a heart for struggle, but not aware of how bad it was. I had a grace too. God protected me from a lot. He gave me a sensitive conscience. I didn't understand sin in the ways I did not struggle. Now I do. I am exposed. I want to see it more. I do not want to hide. I want the light to shine on the darkness. I have nothing to lose. I don't get embarrassed. I am who I am. I'm a Catholic who trusts Jesus. I want you to see Christ, feel Christ, hear Christ. How is Christ? How if Christ is not there? Saint Simeon, the new theologian, said, we are made members of Christ, and Christ becomes our members. And Christ becomes my hand and the foot of all wretched me. And wretched I become the hand of Christ and the foot of Christ. I move my hand, and my hand is Christ entire. For understand me, the divine divinity is indivisible. I put my foot in motion, and behold, it flashes as himself. Do not say that I blaspheme, but accept these things and fall down and worship Christ who made you like this. Each part is the whole Christ himself. And thus well you know that both the finger and my penis are Christ. Do you tremble or feel ashamed? But God was not ashamed to become like you. I am Christ walking. I have Christ in me to share. How dare I be excluded from the physical world and settle for the virtual? So I am wretched and sinful, but I am in Christ, and he is in me. I just, going back to the habitual, I'm in the midst of what it looks like to change a habitual lifestyle of years and years and years and years of a habit that is all I know. And he's probably talking about a porn addiction or a sexual sin addiction. It's common. It's one of the most common things with young men. The same way that I am stepping into something new, he is also stepping away from something and into something new. The thing that you said, and that I think, is that you just have to start walking. You have to see that you want to go somewhere. You can't go somewhere if you don't move.
Yeah.
If you don't take the step. Now, there's no guarantee that you're not going to take a look back. There's a quote that I love that says, only a fool trips on what is behind him. Like, how can you trip on something if it's unless you go back and trip on it, if it's behind you? But the same way that this person is longing so deeply for something that he knows is there for him is the same way that I also am striving as well. So I don't know if that makes him feel better. I don't really have, much. I can talk about the things that I have stepped away from and where I am now. I can talk about how I'm at the beach and I said this in the last one. I look to the house across the street, and that's the bathroom that I watched porn in for the last time, and I don't even think about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
If 6 months removed, I would have gone back there and looked. I wouldn't have even been able to look, because I would have been like, oh, I remember what I did.
Right.
But now I go, I literally was there 3 weeks ago, and I thought on the last day, I haven't even thought about that room. Once you get so far removed of something and you're in a new habit, you begin to forget the person that you were. And that's the most beautiful thing about moving on. But I don't like we said, I don't have a remedy or a recipe for how you get successful on that. I mean, it's all subjective as it comes down to. But you just have to make the step, and you have to recognize what that next step's going to be. I always talk about, well, what's your goal? If somebody wants to do something, what is your goal? Like, what are you trying to do? If you don't establish a goal, then there's nothing to achieve.
Right.
So whether that's, as simple as I want to do my homework more on time, or what is on time? Is that 2 days before? Is that an hour before it's due? You have to start establishing these things if you want to want to hold yourself up to anything.
Right.
So I don't know. I hope that helps.
Yeah. One more thing you mentioned that I feel like might be helpful in any circumstance surrounding like the fear of misusing, because also sin in any case is a situation where you are misusing something that was intended for something else. You don't sin with nothing. If you are prideful, you are using ambition, which ought to be made holy, for your own personal gain. If you're using sexual sin, you're using your body in the body of someone else, in the image of the human body, which is intended for something, and you're using it for your own personal gain. And I think in any case, when you talk about transparency and you talk about being in the midst of what's actually going on, I remember when you and I first started having conversations about putting anything out, and you like floated the idea of like start on TikTok or start on Reels or whatever, and I was like so averse to short form or like and you, one thing that no one besides you knows that you have to deal with, but part of the process of anyone seeing any conversation me and Will have are multiple different instances of me insisting that something be as stripped back and like not packaged as humanly possible, because I am so anxious about falling into that lie of the buttoned up, clean, sort of quote unquote finished product, as if there is such a thing. And when you talk about the position that you're in with the platform that you have and the influence that you have, that same sentiment can very easily be mapped onto anyone who has a voice, period. And I'm an example of someone like that, because I've never had a platform until very recently that extended much beyond people I could get in front of. And there's still a great deal of pressure and all sorts of anxieties that can come in with the like, okay, but like, do they really know me? And do I really know them? And when I was in high school, sort of being pushed down the preacher pipeline, there was this constant anxiety of like, okay, you are listening to what I say, but you have no idea what happened in me to make me say it. And that anxiety is also characterized by this idea of the sort of disparate, cut off, siloed off view of human experience. And this feeling that like, if I can't give everyone the whole package, if I can't give everyone the neat, clean, bullet point, boom, 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 then I have nothing to give them. And even recently, in some conversations that I've been a part of, I've been really frustrated by that idea and it rears its head, to refer back to the sort of existentialist school of thought that I was referencing earlier. Simone de Beauvoir has this idea where she basically says verbatim, there is no such thing as doing something for someone, because you have no control over what they'll do, and they could actually do the exact opposite of what you intended to accomplish for them. So there's no such, in reality, anything you do is really just for you. And like a basic example would be like, I might go up to a homeless guy and I see his condition and I am spurred on to give him some money in hopes that he will use it to, even if momentarily, improve his conditions. He could just go misuse that money and put himself further in the hole he's already in. So Simone de Beauvoir would argue, really, the only reason I can say that I did that is so that I could satisfy my conscience and sort of be the person I want to be. I wasn't actually doing anything for him. There was actually no necessary connection. Nothing, I in no way bridged our subjective experiences just now. We're still just two disparate, thrown individuals, alienated from their circumstances, trying to figure it out. And I find that conception of action and decision and charity pretty disparaging and unsatisfying. But something I do think she gets right, that I think is helpful, is she says, because I can't do anything for anyone, I can be content to provide someone with what she would call a point of departure, which is where, like, because, and there is a degree, something that I do appreciate about this is it actually does, in this respect, have a great deal of respect for the sort of density of each individual's will, in the sense that when I do something, I don't do it with the assurance that I will see the results I thought I was going to see. But I can do it knowing I am offering you a point of departure. And the more separation there is between my facticity and the facticity of the person that I'm doing it for, the greater that discrepancy can be. Mm-hmm. But understanding the value of offering someone that point of departure, even the person that left this comment, we have absolutely no control over whether that person even listens to this. But the goal of this endeavor is not, if we would be lying to ourselves and robbing ourselves of the ability to love the people around us or to act lovingly towards anyone who is listening to our voices right now. If we lied to ourselves and said, the value in this is in my ability to secure this thing, that in reality is only secured in Christ. Whereas the actual authentic value is in my willingness to offer a point of departure for someone to make the same movements that I did. And to contrast someone that I'm not really a big fan of in Simone de Beauvoir with an amazing woman who I'm a very big fan of, a woman named Edith Stein. She was a nun in World War II era Germany. Martin Heidegger, who I referenced earlier, she was actually, he and her were the two like star pupils of a guy named Edmund Husserl. And Heidegger went the existentialist kind of like, philosopher route and got a lot more famous. She converted to Catholicism and became a nun and contributed greatly to the world in her own right, which is why she's a saint. But one of my favorite quotes from her, she says, in order to truly be an image of God, the spirit must turn to what is eternal, hold it in spirit, keep it in memory, and by loving it, embrace it in the will. It is very easy in despair, in feelings of helplessness, to forget what it means that we have been given an effective will by God. The human capacity to just do something because you decide that you want to do it is insane. And the amount of credence that I lend when I say something like what I said earlier of something worth believing is something worth saying, and something worth saying is worth being disfigured for. The amount of credence that I offer and that I give to an ideal that I consider worth believing and worth saying and worth acting on is literally the equivalent of renewing the earth in the image of God. She has another quote where she says, "This is a serious warning cry. Surrender without reservation to the Lord who has called us. This is required of us so that the face of the earth may be renewed." The only way that happens through the body of Christ is by the individuals and the communities that make up that body deciding to do something based on what they have apprehended, turning to what is eternal. And I think there is a paradoxical double meaning in the sense that what is eternal can mean at the same time the thing outside of you, beyond you, that pre-existed you and will exist long after you're physically gone, and like the eternal in the sense of the things of God, and something that is also eternal as far as any person is concerned subjectively is now. I will never know anything but now. I have no cognitive sort of pinpoint for when now started, and I will have no cognitive pinpoint for when now ended. So as far as my conscious experience is concerned, one of the things included when I say the things of God is the now that it exists through him and is being held together by him. Everything that is real right now is real because Christ is sustaining it right now. So in turning to the eternal, I turn to what there is now. And I hold on to it. And I keep it in memory. And by loving it, embrace it in my will, embrace it in my action. And I just, like you say, I just start walking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to go off of that, just explaining what breaking a habit looks like when maybe necessarily it's not a bad thing, but just something you have to move away from.
Yeah.
I talked about a little bit. Now, since we've started this, you get messages, I get messages about, helping people and how they see the good that comes out of these conversations and that we are helping them. And I don't know how you react to those, but I've definitely gotten messages about, I started following Christ because of something you said, or this really made me look back into, Christianity. Even now that I've posted Catholic stuff, I've had, people not so far removed from myself saying, I'm back at the church because of what you were saying. And in that essay that I wrote, or piece that I wrote earlier and read, I mentioned the fact that I went home a month ago and I have this box of letters from any letter that somebody's given me the last 6 years. I have in this box, and I have a specific group of letters that I know when I read I'm gonna be emotional because of what they say in them, in their senior letters from high school. And it's a group of people that I've been praying for years to understand Christ crucified, to see, like I saw in Mass today, the Palm Sunday Mass where the priest is reading the gospel of Jesus walking in, riding the donkey in, leading all the way to the crucifixion, and being overcome with emotion because of what that means for me. I want that so desperately for the people that I care about. And to contrast that with people that I will never see, will never know, saying that I have helped them, but the people that I am so close to, I cannot. There's no movement. And one note in particular, there's verses that were attached to that note. And on the return letter to me, the person wrote me one a year later. And after the letter, there was another piece of paper, and it was those verses that I had given, saying, I have kept these for the last year. It seems fitting to give them back to you now in the same position that I was. And I just think about how I hope that that had some sort of impact being in that room for the year. It may not show up right now. It may not have shown up 4 years ago when I wrote the letter, but there's some sort of lasting impact within that. I wrote this, I don't know when I wrote this. It was before I even went back the last time, but I titled it A Soul Saved. I know I should rejoice at the soul saved, but I can't help but remember my prayer being lost. God, just tell me the number, I will pay the cost. To see the smile on their face makes me freeze. Did I not end my prayer with please? God, I wish for the ones in my life to be yours. I was on my knees, do I need to get on all fours? Sentence me to do some lowly chores. There is nothing I can do. I'll sit on my hands and scream into the sky. I will knock at the door until I die. Answer my plea. Isn't it your delight to see your creation free? And when I talk about why I desperately want to not get away, but this goes back to even my Substack post, my first one, where I cannot see my neighbor, cannot see somebody through my screen as my neighbor, because there's no interpersonal connection. Because it's all imagined. I cannot see somebody like I am seeing you right now. Mm-hmm. Nobody can see you through that the way that I'm seeing you right now.
Right.
And there's no sort of emotion that can encapsulate what my heart would do for these people that I have been desperately praying for, comparatively to these people that I know nothing about.
Right.
Now, it makes me seem like a horrible person to say that I don't care as much that they have walked into this new path, because that wouldn't necessarily be true, because I'm grateful that I had some sort of impact on that. But it's not the same, and it never will be the same. And as much as I feel bad about saying that, my only hope is that there has been some sort of preparation for the fact that what is to come will also be some sort of silver lining or light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
Something I can look back to and be like, I have made an impact before. There is some sort of impact that is still going to be made. But when we talk about habits, I have a goal of wanting to see something through that I haven't seen happen before.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean the other thing had no weight and that it was not successful in its own manner, but there's some sort of other thing that is so deeply ingrained in my heart that I must achieve, because if I don't, I will be that illusory person whom God does not know, whom I do not know.
Yeah.
Because there's no other way for my life. And I go back to this all the time, where we were sitting in that living room and you said, if this means nothing, I should just kill myself. and I think about that all the time, because it's true. I mean, I talked about it a little bit. If it's like, I don't really care about my life if it means I cannot help somebody else.
Right.
And I don't know what other way to do that, but then to start now and begin walking down a new path a new habit and breaking off an old one to achieve that. Yeah. Good?
How long was that?
I think 2.